Forest Road. That's the effluent from the tailings pond. Breach apparently happened 6 hours ago.
This week on Daybreak, we've been looking back 10 years to the collapse of the tailings pond at the Mount Poly copper and gold mine near Williams Lake. Mining effluent, the equivalent of 10,000 Olympic swimming pools, rushed down Hazeltine Creek into the pristine water of Quesnel Lake. So 10 years later, questions continue around whether enough has been done to prevent this from ever happening again. As we'll hear from our next guest, one idea is an entirely new approach to tailings ponds. Joining us now is Akshay Dubey, the CEO of CVW CleanTech.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. Hey, can you just remind us what happened 10 years ago? Just kind of roll back the clock. What were your thoughts when you first heard about the Mount Poly tailings dam breach?
Yeah, 10 years ago, I remember I was sitting at my desk at Ontario Teachers, the pension plan, and looking at video of the Mount Poly disaster. And my jaw was on the floor, but in my mind, I knew while devastating, not fully unexpected, because where you have mines, you have tailings ponds, and where you have tailings ponds, there's a high risk of something happening. So it was obviously devastating to see that happen, and the images were quite visceral, but it wasn't all that surprising either.
Tell me a little bit about the job you were doing at that time.
At that time, I was at the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, which is one of the largest institutional investors in the world. It's about a $250 billion fund today and manages the pensions of active and retired teachers in Ontario.
So how did you get involved in this?
I started my career in investment banking. So I started in mining investment banking, and I think similar to the Mount Poly disaster, while it hadn't happened yet, as a 22-year-old coming out of university, I did have a big crisis of conscience thinking about working in the mining industry and the various negative impacts it can have for the environment. And that was part of the reason that generated a shift for me to move to teachers, where we were looking at other industries as well. Though my path eventually led me back to mining.
For those people who aren't in the industry, tell us a bit more about tailings ponds and why they're needed.
So essentially the way mines work, whether it's in the oil sand space where our technology is focused currently, or it's in the regular mining space for gold and copper, what happens is you dig up the rocks that contain the minerals, you put it through a series of processes, and generally in those processes you add a chemical or solvent to be able to extract the mineral that you're looking for. And then what comes out the other end is your waste, also called tailings. And because they've been exposed to things like, in certain cases, sulfuric acid or cyanide or arsenic or solvents, you do not want to put that back into the environment as is. So those are then put into tailings ponds where they rest. And the theory is over time, a lot of those nasty bits of the tailings will settle and then you'll be able to rehabilitate those tailings.
Do you think that the resource industry learned anything from the Mount Poly disaster?
I would like to think they've learned some things, but industry has still been fairly slow moving in their ability to change how they behave. I know there was a large change that took place in Canada. A lot of the regulations were modernized around tailings ponds. But the mining industry is a global industry, and we saw a very large disaster take place in Brazil. Lots of people lost their lives. I think it was close to 30 people. The environmental liability has been put north of $10 billion. This was a large iron ore mine in Brazil. And we similarly have very large oil sands tailings ponds where the industry hasn't changed their process in decades. And so while industry did make some changes, I think there's a long way to go.
What are you proposing when it comes to tailings ponds?
Well, in our specific case, we've developed a technology to reprocess the tailings from mining oil sands. So when their tailings come out of their process, instead of depositing it into a tailings pond, it would go through our patented process, and we'd be able to recover about 2 million barrels of oil and 300,000 barrels of solvent that they are losing in their process that would end up in the environment. By cleaning that sand of those hydrocarbons, we can then also recover critical minerals, both titanium and zircon, as well as rare earth elements, which are critical for the energy transition. And then finally, our tailings, because we remove these minerals, because we remove those hydrocarbons, are called ready to reclaim under Alberta Directive 85. So they would actually not have to go to a tailings pond, and they could go back to their old mine sites, and they can start going through end-of-life remediation, something that they're just not doing today.
Why hasn't this been done before?
I'd say the biggest challenge is industry is very risk-averse and slow-moving. The oil sands mining space is dominated by 3 large players. There are 6 oil sands mines. They produce about 1.5 million barrels a day. So that'd be about the 13th or 14th largest country in the world. This is a 30 square kilometer region around Fort McKay. But these 3 industry players have been very slow in adopting new technology. Because we went through a period of low oil prices over the last decade, they have basically moved back from making investments in their assets and focused on returning cash to shareholders. So while that seems like a good idea in the short term to help them with their value, I think in the long term, it's actually value destructive because the broader industry, society, investors are looking to these companies to make an improvement in their operations and show the world that they're on a more sustainable path. And that's why technologies like these are critical.
So if you could send a message to those in charge of making these decisions at these sort of resource companies, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd really say that the time is now. Every day that we wait, every day that we study the problem instead of working on moving a solution ahead is a day wasted. And it's only a matter of time until something unfortunate happens. Because the larger these tailings ponds get, the more volume there is in there, the probability of something happening only increases. So what I would say to them is we should really be thinking about moving quickly, finding the solutions, using the solutions that already exist, and deploying them immediately.
I'm glad you're able to reach out to us. Thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is Akshay Dubey, the CEO of CVW CleanTech. Your thoughts? It's been 10 years.